If you compare beer with bratwurst,
and cheese with wine,
or even whiskey,
with donuts,
then we think you can pair all of these delicious drinks with
murder,
conspiracies,
missing persons,
and more.
Drink with us as you feed your craving for true crime and creepy stories.
Well, hello there, good looking.
Good evening. What you got cooking?
Some fun drinks for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
They look really cool.
Yeah, they are really cool. You know, we used to serve this drink at a cool...
I used to make this drink.
Right, yeah. At a very cool restaurant we used to work at. I'm sure not everybody has heard of, but a lot of people has heard of the restaurant Papados, which was a Cajun seafood restaurant.
Yes.
With delicious food. Probably the best seafood I've had in Colorado.
Absolutely.
Because they flew their fish in fresh every day.
That's what we were told to tell our guests anyway.
That's
But I was in their deep freeze. So
that's the rumor.
not to throw them
anyway.
under the bus, but
Yeah, no, I always was confused by that when I walk into that freezer, which was rare.
frozen crab.
'Cause I had to go in there, but then I was like, why do we have a freezer?
But it was delicious regardless.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Oh,
You put butter,
perfect.
enough butter on anything, and it's
Yep.
fantastic.
Cajun seafood that started in Texas.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the first place I had heard of this drink. You are very familiar with
Yes.
it. This is the Hurricane.
And these are hurricane on the rocks.
Yeah, which is actually the
The common
traditional
way.
one.
You can
the
get them frozen.
The
though.
first one. Yeah, we had frozen hurricanes, which was
Yes.
kind of the drawing into the restaurant.
Yeah.
You get a
Could layer them different ways.
I wish
Pretty.
I wish I knew about alcohol and liquors as much as I do now then, because then I would have had it and truly appreciated this drink for what it was, and the fact that you could get a Slurpee version of
Yeah.
it is amazing.
Yeah.
So just a little bit about the drink. I am going to do history on this.
Well, that's good because the story I'm going to tell is chocked full of some historical information as well.
Awesome. Well, there's quite a history on this. This is from somewheredownsouth.com. Got to give them a shout out because I'm going to pretty much read exactly what they say, try and summarize it as much as I can. All right. The Hurricane is a drink with a well-established history. It was invented by the famous Pat O'Brien's bar in New Orleans. Pat O'Brien's has a fascinating history on its own. It was opened as a semi-secret speakeasy during Prohibition. The password to get in was said to be Storms Brewin.
Oh, cool.
That is cool.
That's what this episode should be called.
Oh, I like it. O'Brien invented the Hurricane in 1940s. During World War II, it was difficult to get the more popular Scotch whiskey. At this point, the South hadn't yet taken to rum. However, rum was much more readily available as it came up the Mississippi River from the islands. Because they had such a surplus of rum, the liquor salesmen would strong arm the bar owners into buying it by refusing to sell them whiskey unless they also bought a certain number of barrels of rum. Holy cow, I just realized they still do that. Like, you can't get certain whiskeys that are more sought after. You can't sell it as a bar or a liquor store unless you sell so much of other products, not whiskey, other products. And they do that with a lot of products. Okay, so O'Brien found himself with too much rum, so his bar managers began experimenting with various rum beverages. They realized that rum with passion fruit mix was a delicious combination. It was a stroke of genius when they served the concoction in the famous curvy glass shaped like a hurricane lamp.
I was going to say, you don't have the right glasses.
Wow. I looked for them at our gigantic liquor store by us, but they did not have it.
That's all right.
They had
I think
some
it'll
others.
taste the same.
It does. Yep. And they called it the Hurricane. And it was a hit. And been serving Hurricane cocktail ever since.
Well, it's delicious.
Yeah. So with that said, let's raise a glass of a hurricane.
Storm's brewing.
Get this storm brewing.
That is delicious. And it tastes like the hurricane from Papado. 100%. It's crazy.
Oh, that's too good.
You could drink this down.
Yeah.
Like with no problem at all.
There's 4 ounces of rum in that bad boy. Jeez.
Let me spit that back
Again.
out. Oh my God. It tastes delicious.
Oh, man. Yeah, we got really loud there.
It's really delicious. I'm super impressed.
Well, thank you.
It tastes like a liquid version of the hurricane, like slushy from Papado.
It does. I agree with you. I was pleasantly surprised how it came out.
It's
but if you
fresh.
give me directions, usually I can follow them. I will do it begrudgingly, but
It's fresh and it's not too sweet. And you can't taste the alcohol, but you know you're consuming alcohol. It's lovely.
yeah, there's no alcohol taste to this. Well, I mean, there's a little bit.
It's a
if you
mature
really pay
flavor,
attention.
though. It's
Yeah.
not Kool-Aid. It's fantastic. You can put that in a pitcher at a backyard barbecue, and everybody's napping in the grass. It's fantastic.
Yeah. It's so dangerous.
Yeah.
So dangerous. If you put that in a pitcher, you'd be using, I wonder how many bottles of rum it would take to do it in the pitcher.
Oh, it's delicious. I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, it's 2 ounces of light rum and 2 ounces of dark rum and a few other things. And
Now, you
got
said
it.
it was developed during Prohibition.
Yeah.
So our story is going to take place well before that. However, it happens to take place in a city that you said is connected to this drink, New Orleans.
Nolans.
I know. Do you say New Orleans or New Orleans?
New Orleans.
So do I, but I think occasionally I'm going to be like, New Orleans, which I
just
never ever say.
Gonna switch it up on everybody?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's a interesting choice there. But let's see if your bold move pays off.
Well, let's perfectly pair your hurricane delicious beverage with a story the likes of which we haven't told yet. So located on the corner of Royal and Governor Nichols Streets in the French Quarter of New Orleans, a mansion once owned by Madame Delphine MaCarty is considered one of the most haunted buildings in all of Louisiana.
One more time. The name of this lady. You said it really good, but let me just...
Well, she's got several names.
Oh, nice.
So you just got to wait.
All right. I just wanted to pack it into my memory. Can you say it one more time?
In the first paragraph, it's Madame Delphine MaCarty.
I'm not even going to attempt that. Excellent.
Patrons of walking ghost tours and city tourists alike can be found at all hours of the day and night, standing on the sidewalk, staring up at the 3-story grand gray building, hoping to catch a glimpse of one of the disgruntled spirits who are said to haunt the premises, framed in one of the many large windows. The fear brought on by these rumored apparitions will never compare to the truly horrifying events that took place inside that mansion hundreds of years ago when New Orleans was a very different place than it is today. This is the mostly true story of Madame MaCarty, the savage mistress of New Orleans.
So mostly true.
Yes.
This isn't a based on...
No, it's true tellings, but that may or may not have been exaggerated over the years.
Because it's from such a long time ago.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Marie Delphine MaCarty was born on March 19th, 1787, into a wealthy New Orleans family. At the time of her birth, New Orleans was under Spanish rule, but up until 25 years prior, it had belonged to France, leaving this port city an interesting mix of French and Spanish culture and customs.
Just one more time on the date you just said.
Her birth?
Yeah.
March 19, 1787.
Wow. So that's, 11 years after America became America? 1776?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Well, cool. We're going way back.
Yes.
Let's hop in the Wayback Machine and continue.
Okay. Peabody
There you
and
go.
Mr. Sherman or whatever.
Yeah, that was it. Good job.
Most of the McCarty men came from military backgrounds and wound up rich landowners. In 1794, Delphine, as she would be called, lived with her family on a 1,344-acre plantation, which was located in what is now the Downriver Bayou neighborhood. Delphine's childhood was charmed. Her mother loved to host lavish parties that would carry on late into the early hours of the morning. When Delphine was just 13 years old, a scandalous affair developed between her and Ramon Lopez y Angulo de la Candelaria.
Wow, that was impressive.
Thank you. Lopez was a 35-year-old widower who worked in the position of intendente, or the second in command to the Spanish governor in Louisiana. The couple would be married 6 months into their relationship. At that time, colonial officers were required to acquire the permission of the king to marry local women. Lopez, seemingly uninterested in waiting for a royal license to wed young Delphine, cited reasons of conscience and honor in order to persuade the bishop there in Louisiana to perform the marriage ceremony, and the couple wed in June of 1800.
Well, they're rule breakers. Yeah, I was a little lost there for a second. I was like, wait, this New Orleans king? Oh,
The
France.
Spanish king.
Spanish, yeah. Such a dumb rule. It's so weird.
Well, she was 13. So I wish he would have gotten permission. Like, it seems a little...
Oh, back then.
Not even 1800. 13?
I don't know. It's not... Back then, they did young.
Well, they did young.
Gross young. Yeah, anyway, go on about this 13-year-old.
Upon hearing of Lopez's marriage, King Carlos IV immediately relieved Lopez of his duties. It is also probably important to note that his situation wasn't helped by the fact that he, acting in defiance of the king's orders, opened up the port at New Orleans to be a direct import location of captives from Africa. Lopez was then reassigned to a low-level position and ordered immediately back to Spain. Unhappy with this new position, Lopez began a serious letter-writing campaign, sending pleas and explanations, more like excuses, for his actions to various Spanish officials trying to plead his case. Delphine herself actually made a trip to see the Queen in order to earn back some good grace. The couple's efforts paid off. After being officially pardoned, Lopez was appointed consul to New Orleans, which was now under the authority of America after President Thomas Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase.
But I'm kind of impressed with Delphine. She
I
went
know.
over there, partied it up with the Queen.
Probably.
They became besties, and
And
she
look at
fixed
that.
everything.
They're back
And
in New
he's
Orleans.
back, high ranking, but now he's working for America. Then, right?
Well,
Like,
it would be
how's
more
that
like
work?
an ambassador.
Oh, okay.
Now, just as things were beginning to look up for the couple, tragedy would strike. On January 11th, 1805, Lopez's ship, on its way to meet a pregnant Delphine in Havana, Cuba, other sources actually said the couple were on the vessel together, would hit a sandbar just off the shore, and Lopez would perish.
What?
He can't catch a break.
No kidding. In a sandbar. I mean, that's like a high up bottom of
It would run
the
aground.
ocean at that moment,
And
they must have hit
Lopez
it
y Angulo
really
de
hard.
Candelaria did not make it.
I wonder how he went out. If they hit it really hard and
He like shot off.
But not everybody. Yeah. Or
He didn't wear his seatbelt.
Yeah.
Lopez.
Yeah. Or he was standing in front of like the kitchen knives.
I pictured him doing Jack from Titanic, and he just shoots off the end. Yeah.
He doesn't know how to swim.
Yeah. Now, Delphine would remain in Havana just long enough for her daughter, Maria Delphine Francisca Borja Lopez y Angulo de la Candelaria, to be born
and
baptized
Spanish name for you.
and to bury her husband. Then Delphine and Borgita, which is what Delphine called her daughter, would return to New Orleans. After Delphine's mother passed away, she, at the age of 18, inherited roughly $33,000. And do you want to venture a guess how much that would be worth today?
I'm going to guess somewhere around $3 million.
$2 million.
Ooh.
$2 million, plus the downtown plantation, which was located on the banks of the Mississippi River. This plantation came with livestock, farm equipment, and 52 slaves.
Oh, so she got this money and the land. So she's
doing fine for herself.
Yeah,
Goodbye, Lopez.
She pulled in a whole.
Hello, America's New Orleans.
She's over her husband.
Yeah, she's
real
fine.
Fast.
She's
also grateful for him, but
she's sitting pretty. Now, it was perhaps this set of circumstances that might have enticed a older Frenchman and widower, Jean-Paul Blanc, to pursue a relationship with the single mother. On her 20th birthday, Delphine would marry Blanc. Just as a side note, after her death, or after Delphine's mother's death, her father would go on to have a long-term relationship with someone who at the time was referred to as a free quadroon, which is someone who was 3/4 European descent and 1/4 African descent. Delphine and her brother Louis would be named godparents when their father and this woman, Sophie Musante, welcomed their daughter in 1815. Her name was also Delphine Amici MaCarty. Many MaCarty men would engage in long-term relationships with women of mixed race.
Okay.
And the reason I'm pointing it out is because once you know what Delphine did, considering her motive, it might be important to know sort of her family's stance or thinking on different races.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, this is a different time.
Yes.
This is a way different time.
Yes. Now, Delphine and Blanc would go on to have 4 children of their own. Pauline with an E, Laure, Jean, and Pauline without an E. I don't even know.
I'm going to get so confused.
Well, we don't have to say their names ever again.
Okay, cool.
However, what is Pauline with an E? 2 more kids. Pauline without an E. The male and female version, the female and male version of that name?
I don't know. And
anyway,
also,
it's not important, but it's...
themselves as, I'm Pauline with an E.
I can't.
I'm Pauline
without an E. I don't know. It's something that I get stuck on.
They're English in my head, so for some reason.
Delphine's second husband, Blanc, was a jack of all trades. He was a ruthless businessman, merchant, banker, state legislator, lawyer, and slave trader. He considered notorious pirates Jean and Pierre Lafitte to be his close associates. Actually, in 1814, Blanc was the individual who delivered Jean Lafitte's offer to Governor Claiborne for his pirate men to help defend New Orleans against the British during the War of 1812.
Wow. This dude's like everywhere.
Yes.
Jack of all trades, including trading human beings.
Yes.
Jeez.
Jack of all trades, master of none. The jack of many
master
is
of
better
some.
than one. Something like that.
Jeez Louise. You got to get used to, like, I know you study history a lot. So for you, it's probably pretty common to just see, the slave days. And I don't look at it a lot. And when
it's unsettling.
It's not, I mean, yeah, of course it's unsettling, but it's also, it's like just this, oh, geez, I forgot. Like, things were awful back then.
Yes.
For some.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, go on.
But alas, less than a year after the Battle of New Orleans, 50-year-old Blanc would pass away, leaving his wife a widow for the second time at the age of 28, this time with 5 children to raise on her own.
He passed away at what age?
50.
Oh, all right. It's kind of old for back then.
I think it's kind of average for back then.
Yeah. She probably didn't kill him then.
Oh, no, he wasn't her target victim.
Second husband to go out.
Yes.
The first one, like, died, and I'm doing quotation marks.
Off a boat. She could have been in Havana at the time. We don't know.
Kind of crashed, but didn't. Like, everybody else lives but him.
She's just holding his head under the water. He died.
Yeah.
Anyway, Blanc is also going to leave young Delphine with over $160,000 worth of debt, which is roughly $2.5 million in today's money. Over the next 10 years of her life, Delphine would make several moves in order to get herself out of the tricky financial situation she found herself in, including auctioning off Blanc's property, including several enslaved persons, in order to try and pay off his debts.
Oh, he came with debts. Okay. I was like, how is she in financial troubles? Like, she's doing very well.
Yeah, he had debts.
After dude died.
Now, it was also during this period of time that, while under Delphine's authority, 8 enslaved people would die. The cause of death for each was completely unknown.
Oh, man.
Then, in 1824, Delphine's father would help her officially rid herself of financial strife by him as well passing away and leaving Delphine with an inheritance of a measly $5,000 and 2 slaves.
Okay. So $5,000 if 33 is $2 million.
I don't know.
It's a couple $100,000.
She was a whiz with finances, though. I don't know what she did.
And she's also like getting these inheritances. Like,
yeah.
Where's ours?
I know.
Come on.
I don't know.
Somebody die and leave us
no,
money.
Knock
already.
on wood. Don't say that. In February of 1825, Dr. Leonard Louis Nicolas Lalaurie arrived in New Orleans, a young 22-year-old man straight out of medical school, having been raised in a middle-class French family. Once in New Orleans, Dr. Lalaurie placed an ad in the Louisiana Courier offering to, I quote, straighten crooked backs and correct other deformities, end quote.
He's a chiropractor.
He is 100% a chiropractor.
Cool.
It is believed that one of Delphine's daughters, Pauline with an E, had one such deformity. Discovered letters had indeed referred to a Mademoiselle Blanc, the hunchbacked young lady. So she was beautiful.
So, what's her face's daughter has a hunchback.
Daughter. Yeah,
and
a hunchback of New Orleans.
So, what's her mom look like?
There are pictures.
Is she considered beautiful back then? Or
it's really hard to say what was beautiful back then. It was like a completely different standard. I mean, I think she was. She was a beautiful, terrifying woman.
Spanish woman.
She had dark hair.
Interesting.
Yeah. She was a pretty lady.
With a hunchback 20-year-old daughter or something like that.
Yeah, something.
Jeez. All right. Let's hear the rest. We haven't even gotten to killings.
I know. Sorry.
I feel like,
Perhaps Delphine reached out to Dr. Louis Lalaurie, and that was the initial introduction between Delphine, who at this point in time was a 40-year-old grandma, and a bright 22-year-old doctor. However, they made a connection. As a result of their relationship, Delphine found herself pregnant and unmarried. Jean-Louis Leonard Lalaurie was born to the couple out of wedlock. When Jean-Louis was 5 months old, the couple found themselves at a notary negotiating their marriage contract. At that time, Delphine was worth $66,389, $2.2 million.
Oh, man.
Once the money matters were settled, the couple made their marriage official at St. Louis Cathedral, making sure to roll back the date on their official marriage documents 6 months so as not to draw criticism from the fine people of New Orleans. Delphine's third marriage to Dr. LaLaurie was troubled at best. Letters to and from friends of the couple would document the uglier sides of this relationship. These letters also were some of the earliest evidence of Madame LaLaurie's cruelty toward her slaves. In 1831, Madame LaLaurie purchased 2 plots of land with a partially constructed residence on one.
So Madame LaLaurie is Delphine.
Yes.
You should throw in a AKA Delphine every now and then because could get confusing. She's on her 3rd dude now,
that.
And her name has changed.
I know.
Whatever you got, like 4 times since the beginning.
I was taking some artistic license and was using her name as a metaphorical, like, evolution to the human that she became. And once she becomes Madame LaLaurie, I think the monster that I'm about to describe is already there. So Delphine is this woman who has her troubles, has her successes, has her children, has her husbands, and as she progresses through time, turns into something else. And so I was using her name as like a hidden sign of evolution.
No, I like it.
And once she's Madame LaLaurie, watch out.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely what you should have done. And
That's all
unfortunately,
right.
you're doing a podcast with me who, like, just is like, who the fuck is this?
I know.
But at the same time, we're at her final evolutionary
Here she
stage.
is.
So it was
It's
perfect
about to
timing
happen.
for my comment there. Go on.
Now, these 2 plots is where LaLaurie would build the manor that would one day become the haunted LaLaurie Mansion. This new and lavish home did not do much to mend the troubles within the LaLaurie marriage. In November of 1832, Delphine petitioned the courts for a separation from the bed and board of her husband. I don't want to sleep with him, and I don't want to live with him. And that's how it worked back then.
What is that? Bed and board?
Not
boarding.
in my bed, not in my house.
Yeah. Oh.
Now,
You could petition for that, huh?
back then you could.
Man.
Delphine.
I bet there's a lot of women that wish that was still around
Yeah.
if they knew it was around.
Yes.
Now it's just go on the couch.
Yes. Delphine told the court that her husband treated her in such a manner as to render their living together unsupportable. She also said that Dr. LaLaurie had beat her in front of witnesses, which is worse than without witnesses, I guess.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I was going to choose to beat
Don't do it in
my
front of
wife,
people.
I wouldn't do it in front of people.
Now, 5 months after Delphine initially petitioned for Dr. LaLaurie to leave, he acquiesced and moved to a new residence in Plaquemines Parish. Then, on April 10th, 1834, the devilish side of Madame LaLaurie would be brought to light, and the horrors of what was happening behind the walls of her beautiful home were discovered. It was on this night that a fire broke out somewhere within the giant home. At the first sign of smoke or flames, neighbors close by came rushing to help. They had the intention of either throwing water on the flames or assisting the family in evacuating. Neighbors were shocked when, upon arrival, it appeared as though Madame LaLaurie was the only one in the home. There were no signs of her children, and there were no signs of her slaves.
Oh, so she has 3 slaves, right?
Oh, she's got lots of slaves.
Oh, I just know she got 3 slaves and her inheritance, and
Yeah, she's got more.
just gave her the benefit of not getting more.
Now, Judge Jacques Francois Connage was one of the first neighbors to arrive on scene. He asked Delphine for permission to have the slaves that he knew were there to be moved from the home and taken to safety. To this request, Delphine replied, and I quote, "There are those who would be better employed if they would attend to their own affairs instead of officiously intermeddling with the concerns of other people." End quote.
Jeez Louise, what a bitch.
Yes. Well, as the fire spread, Judge Connage gave orders to all the other helpful citizens to break down the doors of the home. Later, Judge Connage would tell a fellow judge giving a legal deposition that when he arrived, he was, quote, apprised of there being in one of the apartments some slaves who were chained and were exposed to perish in the conflagration, which is fire. Now, some believe that the stories that have come from that night detailing the horrific crimes of Madame Lalaurie are embellished for the sake of the story. However, there are certain pieces that have stayed consistent over the centuries. Let's begin with the most consistently accepted details. When firefighters first enter the home, they discovered 7 incarcerated slaves in the attic, all of whom had been tortured. Each one was beaten, bruised, and near death. Some were covered in blood, their eyes having been gouged out. Others, their skin flayed. Some of these victims were found to have their mouths sewn shut after having been filled with excrement. These individuals, I know, I never get sick, ever, like physically to my stomach doing any of this. This makes me ill.
So they're chained up.
Mm-hmm. And completely mistreated. These individuals had to be removed from the home on stretchers. Now, in support of this, as a true retelling of the events, jurist and historian Charles Gaillard described the scene that night in the following way. He had seen the slaves, quote, carried out on stretchers and laid under the arches of the portico of the Cabildo. They had changed from black to ashen gray and were barely breathing, end quote. Judge Connage, along with some others, discovered, and I'm not sure if they're a part of the 7 or 2 additional, but discovered 2 black women who had to be freed before they could escape the fire. One of these women had been wearing a large and heavy iron collar and heavy leg irons wrapped around her feet. They prevented her from walking without great difficulty. One of the individuals who was rescued from the home ultimately passed away days after the fire. Now, there are also other stories that have survived that night that hint at an even more wicked and depraved side to Madame Lalaurie, and perhaps to her husband, Dr. Lalaurie, as well. One of the responding neighbors would tell others that one of the enslaved individuals that had been found in the home had had her bones broken and reset so they resembled a crab. Another story told... Yeah.
So these are stories from other individuals that
showed up that night. Mm-hmm.
Is there, I don't know. Are they believed to be, like most of these stories believed to be true, or is this where a lot of the exaggeration happens?
So I've got quotes coming up that I think makes these bits seem more believable than not. One coming from the French consul himself who visited the home.
Jeez, so this is legit a house of horrors.
Yes. Yep.
Legit. Like that, you've already told us 2 things that...
It's appalling.
They're like, that's the most messed up part in a horror movie. Like
all of
one
it.
Of those only one of those is like everything leads up to that awful part. And this is something like this lady has multiple things already. Yep. Like the whole crab thing.
Well, we're gonna touch on that crab thing later because you and I are going to have a discussion about perhaps the role that the doctor, the chiropractor played in all of this. But we're not ready for that yet.
I got more thoughts on that.
Yes. Okay. Now, another story told of another woman found wrapped in human intestines. Others would report that they came across bodies with large holes in their heads, wooden spoons nearby, supposedly used to stir the brains of the victims. One story specifically recalled a man with a, quote, large hole in his head, his body covered from head to foot with scars and filled with worms, end quote.
Jeez. What the?
Now, another rescued victim, who is described as a mulatto boy, had been taken from the House of Horrors, and he would reveal that he had been chained up for 5 months, fed daily with only a handful of meal, and receiving every morning the most cruel treatment. French consul Armand Sayard told of his visit to the mansion in an account submitted to the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he described the following, quote, dislocated heads, legs torn by the chains, bodies streaked with blood from head to foot, from whiplashes and sharp instruments, end quote. So if you don't want to believe every story, there is enough, like primary source evidence, to suggest that what this woman did was beyond. I mean, beyond.
Yeah, she was a murderous psychopath doing insane, torturous things.
Yeah, we hadn't had a female one, and I guess I wanted to swing for the fences.
Inclusion.
Women are just as good. The Mad Butcher. And then she comes along and she's like, hold my hurricane.
Yeah, good. Thank God there's only so many women doing this.
Yes, because we do things better. Now, the reports of the number of victims discovered range anywhere from a handful to over 100. Now, this is where the story goes, and it's all true. Goes from like, what the F to one woman to, oh my gosh, what is happening? So outraged at the truth exposed that evening, those who had responded to the fire that night, like, developed into an angry mob. This mob, it is said to have reached nearly 4,000 people. This group tore that mansion apart. They smashed everything in sight, ripping apart any fixture they could get their hands on. The rioters smashed furniture, china, and crystal. They destroyed art and broke windows. They dismantled the stairs. Even the wainscoting bore the brunt of this group's rage.
Man. Is what's her bucket and
here she is. We're gonna tell.
Is she in custody?
No. This is what happens to Delphine. In the midst of this chaos, one servant, still faithful to Delphine, Bastien the coachman, brought the horse-drawn carriage around to where Delphine waited. With confidence, Delphine, ignoring the utter chaos going on around the property, climbed into the carriage. Members of the mob who witnessed Delphine's intended escape are said to have grabbed at the horse's reins and even made to pull Delphine from the moving carriage. But Bastien, the coachman, was able to steer the carriage free, and off Delphine rode into the night.
All I picture on that scene is the guy from Hell that drives the carriage for Jack the Ripper.
Yes.
Like it's his.
I think it's Bastien. I went too hard with the French. Bastien.
Bastien. I think you gotta do the stien too.
See,
Bastien.
And I think of the Never-Ending Story. Bastien.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Well, when Bastien, the coachman, returned a short while later with an empty carriage, the remaining members of the destructive group, according to one account, tore the carriage apart and stabbed the horses, furious at Delphine's getaway.
Jeez.
It was a night New Orleans would not soon forget.
I guess not, if we're talking about it now.
Man alive. Despite the fact that New Orleans had laws protecting enslaved people from unusually cruel punishments, rumors about Delphine's mistreatment of her slaves were not actually that uncommon in the later years of her life. For one, Delphine was said to have kept her 70-year-old cook chained to the stove where she would be starved.
Jeez.
Another story also surfaced of a male slave who had been so frightened of Delphine's treatment that he threw himself from a third-story window of the home so that he would fall to his death. It was from this same window that a 13-year-old female slave would fall to her death as well. It was said that this young girl was brushing Delphine's hair when she pulled a little bit too hard, and in response, Delphine chased her right out of the window. Now, witnesses in town actually saw Delphine burying the body of this young girl, and that action would warrant a $300 fine to be assessed on Delphine.
$300 fine, and no investigation, no...
Well, wait.
Okay.
When the ground of the property would be excavated after the fire in search of buried victims, her small skeleton would be uncovered. Her daughters were even thought, so Delphine's daughters, were thought to have been whipped at the hands of their mother when at times they attempted to help the mistreated slaves escape. Now, this is what you were talking about. In addition to rumors, records of letters written years before stated that at some point Delphine had been brought before a criminal court for the, quote, barbarous treatment of her slaves, end quote. But when it was determined that there was a lack of witnesses willing to testify, she was absolved of the charges.
So people around were scared of her too. I mean, that's it, all these people, or it's just a time of cowardness, and that's, like she benefited from it.
Well, and then you just have...
Still, they were scared, like they could complain, but I'm not going to go in front of a court.
The cultural acceptance of groups of people who don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now...
Incredibly sad.
Another very interesting rumor, which is what I want you and I to discuss for a moment, was that Delphine kept secret slaves so that her husband, Dr. Lalaurie, could practice Haitian voodoo on them. This, combined with the story of the woman whose bones were broken and reset to resemble a crab, indicates that perhaps the madness behind the crimes against her slaves had something to do with her relationship with Dr. Lalaurie.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense with that rumor, because she's not a practice medical person. Like, there's no way she'd be able to get away with resetting bones and having them heal a certain way.
I think where my mind is at is a larger conversation about motive. So obviously, Delphine Lalaurie comes from a family that owns slaves. There has to be some level of thinking that African people are less than if you're willing to do that. But there are other parts of her life that make you wonder, so they have slaves, but she doesn't seem to be raised hating this group of people, right? She's the godmother to a half-sibling that comes from at least partial African descent. So where does she go from talking to a queen, being married to a man who knows pirates, to living in a giant house where it seems like she almost takes pleasure in doing horrific, terrible things to a group of people? To me, it almost is they're convenient because they can't do anything about what she's doing. But what is it? She marries Dr. Lalaurie and turns into Madame Lalaurie. What is the motive behind doing the things that, like, we have evidence that she did?
I think one of the biggest change there is Lathery.
So is he like a macabre doctor?
I absolutely think so. And this is judging off. Chiropractic work these days is still looked at like not everybody is all going for the chiropractor. I grew up with a mother that told me never to go to the chiropractor because they don't do anything except give you reasons to go back. Mm-hmm. They only fix you enough that, or they can actually make you worse. So I grew up with that thought, and I've talked to a lot of people that have gone to chiropractors, been screwed up, and won't go back. Love chiropractors, swear by them, and if that's my experience now in 2023 and before, I can't imagine chiropractic work is anything but a fringe science at that time, you know? Mm-hmm. And to me, it would make sense for a man to want to practice that type of work to maybe be mixed up or have some dark thoughts or upbringings, because you mentioned one thing that stands out to me, and all the details that you told us, and that was Haitian voodoo, which voodoo is very prominent in New Orleans.
100% it is.
And I think a big part of that is, so there is definitely Haitian influence on it, but it's interesting because if you look at like what New Orleans is now, you don't think of Spanish influence. You think of French influence. Mm-hmm. And here you have a French doctor, and who knows like how he grew up, but he just pops up on the scene with this fringe practice, and somewhere there he probably has some sort of Haitian voodoo influence on everything. And I say all that just to say, I'm guessing, I can't remember her name to save my life.
Delphine.
Marie
Delphine.
It's actually a pretty name, Delphine. But I don't know why. It just gave her too many names.
I didn't give them to her. French society, Spanish society gave them to her. So here's what I want to add.
Yeah, so she seems normal in the beginning, and what changes? She marries this man.
We've talked about it on one other podcast, and I think it was the Trump family, and it's called Folie à deux, which is the shared psychosis, like the shared delusion. And to me, that's something that can explain it. Like, homegirl didn't have an easy life. I mean, millionaire, yes, but lost 2 husbands, in debt, trying to provide for your kids, whatever. Yeah. This doctor shows up, new ideas. He's trying to make a name for himself. He wants to make it big in America, and perhaps they develop a shared delusion together. And
she also has a hunchback daughter.
Yes.
And she's just like, what am I going to do about this daughter?
But I also think that we've talked about with other cases where killers pick victims that won't be found. And for her and her doctor husband, it was super easy to find their victim base because society allowed for it, right? You had a group of people who were considered property.
Yeah.
They could do what they want, especially behind $1 million Greystone mansion.
Yeah. Acres around
really,
you.
Really sad.
Huge mansion. They're probably not, throwing giant parties for the whole neighborhood. They keep themselves probably. It probably was incredibly easy to be able to get away with. And it probably started out small and escalated to the point of insanity.
Yes. Well, if we were on a ghost tour, This would be the part where the tour guide tells you that what happened to Delphine MaCarty after she was driven off into the night is still a mystery. That late in the 1930s, an old cracked copper plate was found in New Orleans in the St. Louis cemetery with an inscription that read, quote, LaLaurie, Madame Delphine MaCarty, died in Paris, December 7th, 1842. But that, to this day, nobody has been found. Now, that isn't...
Jeez.
That's not the truth.
Okay.
So let's go back to the night of the fire. Once free from the mob of people, Bastian steered the carriage along the Bayou Road headed towards Lake Pontchartrain. Once at the docks of the New Orleans Navigation Company, Delphine boarded a schooner, which is a ship with 2 masts. After crossing Lake Pontchartrain, Delphine landed in the town of Mandeville. There she stayed with her husband.
Where's Mandeville?
Across Lake Pontchartrain.
I'm trying to get my geography in my head. Pontchartrain, Lake Pontchartrain.
We used to serve Pontchartrain as a dish.
Yeah, so that's above Louisiana.
You're going to have to look at a map. I didn't look into it. So she stayed in Mandeville with her husband, Dr. LaLaurie, just long enough to put her business affairs in order, including giving her son-in-law the power of attorney. Now, it would be this son-in-law who would sell the mansion for well below what was paid and then sell 11 of 30 known slaves, including faithful Bastian. It is unclear if all the remaining 19 slaves had been deceased victims of LaLaurie or if they had been so physically affected by the abuse that they sustained and could not be sold.
So she has slaves that survive.
Yes.
And they're still
being sold.
Jeez.
No, in the absolute
just don't get it.
Bedlam of that night, an exact accounting for every soul living in that horrific house never came to be. From there, the LaLauries traveled to Mobile, Alabama, and then to New York. On June 24th, 1834, Monsieur and Madame LaLaurie, along with their son Louis, set sail for France on a boat named Poland. We have confirmation of this sea voyage because American poet William Cullen Bryant was aboard the same boat and wrote of another passenger as follows, quote, a pretty-looking Frenchwoman, a Madame LaLaurie, who committed such horrible cruelties upon her slaves last winter in New Orleans, end quote. And he mentioned somewhere that her home caught fire.
Wow. So she's just telling them these tales as
yes.
they go. Yeah, I did this.
Shut your mouth, LaLaurie.
Couldn't that have been somebody claiming to be her?
Well, after the trio made their way to Paris, Delphine was joined by her unmarried children, Pauline the Hunchback, Laure,
the Hunchback,
and Pauline without the E.
Pauline without the E.
Now, Dr. LaLaurie would leave his wife and son in Paris and move to Cuba, never to see his wife again. Dr. LaLaurie would die in Havana in 1863. As for the savage mistress of New Orleans, she wrote to her children describing a lingering illness, which is believed to be the cause of her death in Paris on December 7th, 1849. Then, in 1851, the body of Madame LaLaurie was exhumed and sent to New Orleans, where it was interred in St. Louis Cemetery in New Orleans, Louisiana.
So that everyone here can piss on her grave.
Well, the only thing I can think of to explain this exhumation and reburial is that perhaps even in death, Madame Lalaurie was not content being so far from the unsettled souls of her victims, the ones who are said to haunt the mansion at 1140 Royal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, and that perhaps her dark spirit longed to be closer to the terrible mansion where she was able to do horrific things to people who already were living under a great injustice. Maybe it was one last attempt of a dark entity yearning to inflict more harm, because really, is it so hard to believe that an evil like Madame Lalaurie's never actually dies?